Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Master Series, your guide to intelligent production, brought to you by Entertainment Partners. I'm your host, Natalie Nelson. In the Master Series, we focus on important issues impacting the entertainment industry and its workers through in-depth discussions with legal, tax, payroll, technology, and production experts. And today we are pleased to present the third episode in our series about film financing, and we will be discussing hybrid financing. Two quick housekeeping items as we get started today. First is that we encourage you to post questions for our panelists in the Zoom section of today, the Q&A section of today's Zoom call. You can post questions by clicking the Q&A icon in the Zoom navigation menu, and we'll do our best to save time after our discussion to answer your questions. Also, please take 30 seconds to answer a short feedback survey after today's webinar. This includes the opportunity for you to give us feedback as well as to suggest topics for future webinars. And your feedback is very important to us, so a few seconds is all that we ask. Now let's meet today's panel. First, we are joined by Sandra Schulberg, who is president of IndieCollect, a nonprofit whose mission is to rescue, restore, and reactivate American independent films. A longtime movie producer and indie film advocate, she founded the IFP, co-founded First Run Features, and served for many years as senior vice president of the PBS series American Playhouse. Her film credits include the Sundance Grand Prize winner, Waiting for the Moon, and Oscar-nominated Quills. She also teaches film financing and international co-production at Columbia. Also with us today, and our co-panelist and leader of the financing series is John Hadity, Executive Vice President of the Incentives Group here at Entertainment Partners, where he specializes in the monetization of tax credits and minimum guarantees. John began his career at Orion Classics, a division of Orion Pictures, where he served as technical and administrative director. He is former president and CEO of Hadity Associates, a consultancy firm that specializes in risk management and production finance. And he is also the former executive vice president of motion picture and television production finance for Miramax Films. Some of his recently financed projects include Snowden, American Made, and The Assistant. Good morning, Sandra and John, and thank you so much for joining us today. It is lovely to see both of you.
Good morning.
Good
and
morning.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Sandra.
Hi there, John. Thank you for inviting me to do this with you.
I'm thrilled that you can be here. And just so everyone knows, I have the distinct pleasure of teaching with Sandra at Columbia. So I'm her teaching partner, and we make a great team.
Indeed. It's a lot of fun to work with you on trying to get these young producing students on their way.
Exactly. So, I want everyone to know the one of the reasons why Sandra was the perfect person to invite to join me today, not only as a filmmaker in her own right, but Sandra has also taken advantage of hybrid film financing. So, you're the perfect person to have in this conversation. So, let's kick it off by let me ask the question: what is hybrid film financing?
Well, hybrid film financing is a term that we use to describe the concept of putting together in a single movie or documentary film sources of financing that might be looking for a profit and sources of financing that are not seeking to participate in the revenues of a film. So this is the concept of combining for-profit and not-for-profit monies in the same production.
Well, so I've oftentimes heard you talk about a double bottom line. So explain to everybody what you mean by that.
I think that all backers, whether they're investors looking to secure a profit participation or whether they are nonprofit backers, are interested in this concept of a double bottom line, by which I mean they want to have a social impact. And that is really the key concept you have to understand when you think about financing a hybrid film or whether your film could be appropriate for hybrid financing. So the idea is that the film is intended not just to be entertaining, but to have a social impact. the other aspect of the double bottom line is obviously if you make a great film that reaches its audience, it may well generate income. And so the other side of this double bottom line concept is that this film could actually be an income generator. And in some cases, we know that these kinds of social impact films can actually generate very significant revenues.
And also, you know, I of course think about Participant, right, as a great example of companies that have a call to action. I think in every one of their films, there's a call to action. Clearly, they're doing impact investing, right?
Yeah.
They are clearly looking at, you know, they're not in business, you know, to do this for free. They want to make a profit, but they certainly do want to change hearts and minds, right? And so they're
Exactly.
a good example.
That's a good example. I'd like to go back and just try to clarify a little bit more for people. The three ways in which these kinds of deals might be structured. So on one level, you would have backers who are not interested in participating in the income that your film is going to generate. And that is true soft money, as we might refer to it. It's not recoupable. It could be in the form of grant. There are other types of soft money. Secondly, you have people that want to recoup their investment, but not necessarily profit. So that might be a program-related investment, for instance, where in a sense, it's a recoupable loan. So there are different kinds of structures that fall under that general category. And the idea usually behind that is that you want to recoup this money so that you can take that money and put it into another worthwhile project. You're not necessarily looking to make a profit. You're just trying to recycle the money. And then there are true impact investors who are putting in money in the form of investment with the hope not only of recouping their investment, but also of making a profit. And again, generally, the idea is to use those profits to invest in another profitable social impact film. So these are three of the main ways in which you think about the people that you may be trying to approach, or the audience, if you will, of backers out there for a movie that you want to make that would be eligible for a hybrid, that would be considered a hybrid film and eligible for this kind of financing. I'd like to go on and just explain to people that, you know, the core underlying concept that drives hybrid financing is this concept of mission. You and as the producer, and your film really has to have a mission. And this gets us into a very interesting understanding of an analysis of how the United States government, our capitalist system, provides for, nonetheless, tax-deductible donations to charitable projects, including social impact movies. So in many other countries, most other countries of the world, governments have an established government-funded and government-run film body. We don't have that in the United States. The American Film Institute might sound like that, but it's not that. We do not have a government-run film body in the United States.
And you're talking about on a federal level.
On a federal level, right. But what we do have is in the federal tax code, in the Internal Revenue Services tax code, is we have this concept of a 501c3, a nonprofit organization. And underlying that is this concept of having a charitable purpose or mission. So under the tax code, the 501c3 tax code, this definition of a charitable organization is really very, very broad. And I'd like to just, mention some of the things that are a part of that definition, because I think, you in the audience will comprehend that this gives us as producers a tremendous amount of latitude to make movies that also can be defined as having a charitable mission. So, for instance, under the IRS code, any film, in this case, we're talking about films, that has an educational, scientific, or literary raison d'etre, mission, purpose, qualifies. Films that deal with the distressed, the underprivileged, though that is specifically referred to in the code. The advancement of education or science, that's specifically referenced in the code. Projects that deal with lessening neighborhood tensions, eliminating prejudice and discrimination, defending human and civil rights, and combating community deterioration, for instance. These are all specific references in the code to help us understand this notion of a charitable mission. And sometimes we think of charitable as like giving, donating at a church or a synagogue, or donating to to feed an organization that is involved with feeding the hungry, for instance. But I want you to think of charitable in a somewhat more ecumenical sense, because really what it refers to is an educational mission, an altruistic mission, a benevolent mission. So these words, I hope, will get you to think more broadly about how your film might qualify as a film that has a charitable purpose. So this kind of latitude really enables us as film producers to frame our projects in such a way that they could attract hybrid financing.
So granted that you get the tax deduction, right, when you are writing the check to a 501c3, does that mean, as a filmmaker, whether you're making a narrative feature or a documentary, does that mean you have to set up your company, your production company, as a 501c3?
You don't have to have your own 501c3, but I think that, so let's talk about the different legal structures that you might need in order to combine for-profit and not-for-profit funds. If you are looking forward to a career in which you plan to make all of your movies, make movies that have a call to action or have a message or are intended to educate or are intended to kind of open people's eyes to the world or are intended to promote tolerance and understanding or are intended to educate and promote civil and human rights. If you think that's going to be your career ahead of you and you're a young filmmaker or producer, I would strongly recommend that you do set up your own 501c3, because it will be there for you and you'll be able to directly accept grants and donations from people who want an immediate tax deduction. So, and it's not complicated to do. That's one of the great things about this system we live under, is that setting up this kind of corporate entity is no more complicated than setting up a regular C Corp or S Corp or LLC. So I would definitely recommend that. But if you do not have your own 501c3, then you can accept grants and donations, as I'm sure many of you in the audience know, through a fiscal sponsor. So you would ally your project yourself with an organization that is a 501c3, is a nonprofit organization, and that has a policy of accepting donations on behalf of filmmakers. So the Film Independent is an example, the Gotham Media, Film and Media Institute in New York, both formerly called the IFP, and other in New York Foundation for the Arts. There are a number of organizations that do this precisely to help filmmakers accept grants and donations for hybrid films. On the other side, if you are also for this film taking in monies that are from investors who believe in your film but would love to profit by it if it turns out to be successful, then you'll want to have your own production account, your own corporate account separately from the 501c3 or from the fiscal sponsor. And that, as John and I teach in our course at Columbia, could be an LLC. In some cases, you would want to create a C Corp to actually run the production and collect all the rights, expend all the production monies and assign the rights back to the LLC. So, we're not oversimplifying this process. There are a number of legal structures that you need to put into place, but none of this is terribly complicated. And I think anyone in the audience who's a producer knows that we do this routinely. The only difference in this case, if we're talking about hybrid financing, is that there will be this nonprofit arm, either your own, if you have your own LLC, or the fiscal sponsor. There will be this arm that is set up to accept grants and donations from people or institutions that are benefiting from the 501c3 section of the federal tax code.
Now, are there limitations on the kind of entity that's able to accept the monies from a fiscal sponsor, or frankly, from anybody who's wanting to contribute monies to get that tax deduction? So in other words, can an LLC, if an LLC is set up that's owned by a number of investors, right, and that entity is obviously intended to be a for-profit entity, can that entity collect the money through from a fiscal sponsor?
You would rather, or I would rather on your behalf, that those funds that came through the fiscal sponsor go directly into the production account. And so that's why I referenced the C Corp, because normally we would set up, in any case, a C Corp to actually run the production, to create a kind of corporate veil around the production itself. I mean, John, you know that you and I regularly recommend this, and you might want to expound on this, but we would prefer, and I think that most fiscal sponsors would rather that the funds go directly into the C Corp rather into the LLC. Because if the funds go into the LLC, they are definitely being, they're going into the same bank account as the investment group's funds. And really what the donor wants is to have the money goes directly into the production account. So I just think it's not impossible to do it the other way, but I just think that's a cleaner and more practical way to handle this.
Well, I agree, especially in view of the fact that the majority of these productions are going to also, in addition to their fundraising, they're going to want to chase some of the incentives that are being offered regionally, right? And that the whole, that system in several cases is really fundamentally controlled by taxes, right? And whether or not you owe tax or pay tax. And so if it was a 501c3 that was chasing after a refundable tax credit, it might complicate things tremendously.
Yeah,
right?
That's really apples and oranges. And,
Yeah.
You're talking about, a different kind of soft money at the state level, which is part of most states' economic development policies. And those funds are extremely valuable to, I think, to any American producer or foreign producer shooting in an American state that does have a state tax incentive of some form. So you're absolutely right. And although that's not the topic specifically of this webinar, I'm glad that you mentioned this because it is part of the whole, let's say, soft money gamut of funds that might be useful to any one of you trying to make a movie with a double bottom line, let's call it.
Right. And we actually did cover incentives in an earlier webisode. I think the point I'm trying to drive home is that you can certainly commingle all of these funds, right? It's possible to get several grants. It's possible to get several donations, whether you have a 501c3 of your own or you're working through a fiscal sponsor, plus chasing state incentives. I mean, that you can commingle this stuff, right? So it's
not only can you, but I would say you must.
Right.
Especially if you're trying to make a film that is, more than just sheer or light entertainment. You're probably going to need to conceive of your project as a hybrid film, and you're going to need to avail yourself of this spectrum of financing sources, and you're going to ultimately be commingling all of that money into one production account, and we would recommend that this be your line production account, your C Corp.
Right. So let's talk about, I just spent, I don't know, a couple of hours the other day looking through, 60, 70 different sources of grants, all kinds, $5,000 for, supporting women filmmakers, $10,000 for supporting a particular geographic area, $15,000, $20,000 for stories related to whatever, right? But I would say what I was seeing generally in the grants world was, anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000. That's pretty much where these one-off grants seem to come in at. But let's talk about bigger ticket items, right? Because you and I talk a lot about PRIs, and that's a much bigger ticket item, and a hugely important opportunity in the hybrid financing space. So I'd love for you to kind of introduce that concept and let's talk about it.
Yeah, well, I mentioned that a few minutes ago that there are entities, they would tend to be large foundations that in, relatively rare cases, because this is not happening on a grand scale, but where the mission of your film aligns with the mission of a specific foundation, there is an opportunity for that foundation. And you may have to go in and make a special case for this, but there is an opportunity for that foundation to make a program-related investment. And basically, you can think of it also as a type of non-recourse loan. It is intended to, it is repayable. But if the film doesn't generate enough money to repay it, it converts essentially to a grant. And as you say, John, many we do not have many foundations in this country that support film, sadly. And where they do, these grants tend to be, as you said, relatively small. So if one can get a major foundation to make a PRI for your production in the amount of $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, then you're really satisfying. You're accessing a much larger chunk of money from a single source, and presumably, hopefully, you're also helping that foundation to achieve its mission, because the foundations, where and when they invest or support a film, it's obviously because they hope to reach a large audience. Films have that potential, they have that capacity. So if you can make the argument that your film has the potential to reach a wide audience and an identifiable audience, they may decide this is worthwhile. So I've done this. I think it's really important to, as you do your research, figure out which foundations do on a regular basis PRIs, program-related investments. But I think it's also possible to approach a foundation. Let's say you're shooting a film about, I don't know, mental illness in Ohio. I think it's also possible to go to the local foundations, and there are some very progressive foundations in Ohio, just by way of example, and say to them, look, instead of, maybe they don't even have a grant program for film, but you could go to the foundation executives and suggest that this might be an opportunity for a program-related investment. I really urge producers to explore this opportunity, because even though it's not that common, it is absolutely within the parameters of any foundation to do such a thing. And some of them have, as I said, a policy of making PRIs, but you shouldn't, but you should also take the initiative to approach foundations that don't necessarily have a stated policy of doing this.
Sandra, I'm going to put in the chat the Ford Foundation's video that we share in class.
Yeah,
because I think that would be an interesting thing so that people can understand why would a foundation make an investment instead of a grant. So I'll put that in the chat right now.
Okay, that's a good idea. And maybe we want to take some questions, or I could also talk to you all about some of the ways that may be less obvious to you, that for instance, we at IndieCollect are combining for-profit and not-for-profit.
Well, actually, I wanted to, before we take questions, I did want to ask you about that, because has IndieCollect actually ever acted as a fiscal sponsor?
Well, we actually have. We've done that in a couple of cases only, and I should step back and explain to people that, as Natalie mentioned very briefly in my bio, that IndieCollect was started by me as a campaign to scare the living daylights out of all of my fellow film producers, as well as the younger generation, because I think, we're so focused on financing our films, getting them produced, getting them out in partnership with various distributors and through online platforms, that we often don't stop to think about how we're going to make sure that our films survive over the long term. So this has become a huge issue for me, and my personal mission is to wake up filmmakers and get them to realize that their films, and most indie films, in fact, will be lost or destroyed or lost from view in the next decade if we don't do something about it. And this includes filmmakers who actually, if there are any of you in the audience who made your films on celluloid, that has its own future-proofing strategies, and we specialize that on resurrecting, on scanning, restoring, and resurrecting films shot on celluloid. It is also a huge problem for those of you who perhaps might have created your films on some kind of tape medium. And actually, those of you who are younger, whose work was recorded in a digital format, are facing perhaps the greatest risk of all, because we do not yet have really reliable ways of saving digital files, and digital motion pictures are thus extremely ephemeral. Many people are saving their films on hard drives, which have a very short shelf life. So this is just a tremendous risk for all of us as filmmakers. How are we going to make sure that our films survive? Not just in our lifetime, but beyond our lifetime, because our films theoretically can outlive us, but only if we take steps to intervene and save them. So at IndieCollect, we have served as a fiscal sponsor for an organization that specializes, the Al Larvik Conservation Fund, specializes in saving home movies. We did that for a year before the founder got her own 501c3. We've also taken donations, and we do this on a regular basis. We take donations from individual high net worth individuals who want to make a donation to restore a specific film. So we accept those donations, and those donations go into the restoration of a specific movie. The rights to that restoration stay with the filmmaker, who hopes to go out and make money with that film. So in a way, we're taking charitable donations, and we're funneling them towards a project that will perhaps go out and make a profit. So this is a kind of public-private partnership that we're engaged in every day of the week, as we generate a variety of financing sources to make sure that these films can be restored and resurrected. We like to say reactivated, meaning they get back out into the marketplace, they get to new audiences. And we really want the benefit of that. If these films generate income again, we want that income to go to the original filmmaker or filmmakers. This is something that, if you're an independent filmmaker, it's very hard, as you know already, to make a living at this. And you've got to husband your own assets. The films that you've made become your assets. And we hope that you will, either retain the rights to those films or get them back at some point, and that these films can once again become a source of income for you. And we actually find that, films that maybe didn't make any money the first time around, maybe they were ahead of their time, maybe people didn't realize how important they were, that the second time around, they may be much more successful. And there may be new distribution platforms that enable them to be much more widely shown. So my message to all of you is learn how to save your own films for the long term. And if you don't know how to do this and you need help, please come to me at IndieCollect. We will help you.
Thanks, Sandra. So there were a couple of things in the Q&A that I want to address, and it's really around the confusion around LLC versus C Corp, and taking in the money, and who has the bank account. To really kind of oversimplify this, when most people call their lawyer, hey, I bought this script, or I optioned this screenplay, I need to set up an entity to actually do that, to purchase that, if you don't do it personally. So, typically the lawyer will say, okay, set up an LLC, and it will be the LLC that you are the managing member of. You, the producer, are the managing member. And you, so you, in essence, by way of the LLC, will now own the rights to the screenplay that you're about to embark on fundraising for. Ultimately, when you go out and you raise equity for the film, the equity investors, if they're smart equity investors, they're going to want to also be members of the LLC and have an ownership interest in not only the LLC itself, but of all the assets owned by the LLC. So, and that's great. So you can collect money from those investors. The LLC will have a bank account, and the money that you raise through equity investors will go into that bank account, and it will sit there. It will eventually own the movie. It will own all the distribution rights, and it will live on for as long as you want it to live on. And hopefully, all the members, including yourself as the managing member, will enjoy the revenue stream on the film. At the same time, while wanting to keep those equity investors at an arm's length from what's actually happening on the production, the cast, the crew. I mean, just imagine.
Locations. Yeah, the
Yeah,
locations where someone
yeah,
might get shot by mistake.
exactly. So in order to keep people, those investors at an arm's length from the production, you might consider setting up a C Corp to be the actual production entity that's going to hire the cast and the crew, enter into location agreements, rental agreements, soundstage agreements, equipment rentals, etc. It will have a bank account. It can accept money from fiscal sponsors that are working on your behalf. It can accept money from grants. It can accept money from anyone that's not expecting to get paid back anything, right? And so that money gets dumped into the C Corp's bank account. At the same time, the LLC's money is going to be dumped into the C Corp's bank account, so that now you have the money, the cash that you need to cover your production expenses.
Correct.
Right? When
Yeah.
the production expenses have all been covered and the film is done, the film will be delivered back up to the LLC who financed it in the first place, because that's where the asset will live, maybe for the next 5 years, maybe forever. But at least long enough for the other members of the LLC to enjoy the revenue stream. And the C Corp can be dissolved unless there's some kind of outstanding insurance claim. You know, after all the accounts are settled up, everyone's been paid, the film has been delivered back up to the LLC, there's no reason to keep the C Corp alive anymore, and it can be dissolved. Right.
That's right. But you're absolutely right. I hope everyone's following this and not, those of you who are less experienced, not daunted by this. I'd also like to address, the point of view of the filmmaker who maybe already has a production entity of his or her own that is either a C Corp or an S Corp. Because let's say you have your own company, you're midway in your career, you're not operating out of your own personal bank account, you have your own company, and you want to embark on a film that might attract hybrid financing. So in that case, you have already let's say your line production entity, but you want to create a separate LLC just for this movie, because you think that this particular documentary film or fiction film is going to attract investors. So then you're starting from the point of view, you already have your corporate entity, but you're going to create an LLC that's going to live to one side of that corporate entity. And if you get donations and grants through a fiscal sponsor, that money can come directly into your existing production entity. So this is just we're saying exactly the same thing, but I'm just pivoting slightly to put myself and some of you in the audience into that seat, because I think that may be common among some of you who are already working filmmakers, working producers.
Right. There was a question in the Q&A about can a fiscal sponsor pass through grants from donors to a narrative feature, not a documentary? And obviously the answer is yes. It doesn't really matter if a fiscal sponsor, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sandra, but there are some fiscal sponsors that just do it as a service, right? And some do it if the project is aligned with their mission, right? Some may be very particular about projects that they want to assist with, and some may not. Some may just do it as a service because, typically a fiscal sponsor gets a fee for doing what it's doing, right?
Yes, I would say, though, that first of all, to underline what you just said, absolutely. There are donors who are going to want to support a fiction film as well as a nonfiction film. So you mustn't think of this as only applicable to nonfiction films. I mean, that's the whole point of what I was saying to start with. As long as your movie, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, has an underlying mission, which is, educational, altruistic, dealing with important social issues, there is no reason why you won't attract some number of donors and or foundations that want to support that film precisely because of what it's about. And, not incidentally who you are, faith in the producer, faith in the director, et cetera. But it's the content of the film that is of interest to them and of concern to them. So at that point, you've already interested this donor, and your film obviously has those inherent characteristics. So the fiscal sponsor, to answer your question, John, the fiscal sponsor is really the intermediary here.
Right.
And the fiscal sponsor's concern is twofold. One, that you're going to provide them with accurate accounting, because they're the ones that are responsible for reporting, for just accounting, being able to account to in their annual accounts, their annual tax filings. They need to account for the money they've delivered to you. And yes, they want to be sure that you've made I think they like to be assured that you've actually made the film.
Right.
That they've done their job. They have acted on behalf of the donor to administratively and financially assured themselves and their donors that the money has been well spent. Let's just put it that way. And I would say well spent means that, you not only use the money for what you said you were going to use it for, but you actually were able to complete the film and get it out there. I mean, ultimately, that's our responsibility as producers, is to use these proceeds to make a film. That's what we're saying we're going to do. And we that's ultimately our greatest responsibility, is to seek the resources we need, manage those resources carefully in order to actually complete this movie and deliver it, both to the people who funded it because they believed in its social impact or its potential for social impact, and those that might have invested in it because they have faith that it's going to reach a broad audience, and they're looking for that double bottom line. In other words, they're also behind its social impact, its social mission. But as producers, finally, our responsibility is to raise the money and make sure it's properly spent and deliver the end result.
Right. Although I do want to talk for a second, just talk about distribution, because there are a lot of independent films that get made with hybrid film financing that may not be successful in finding a distributor. And in the case of the hybrid financing we're talking about, if we're talking about getting funds from people that don't require or expect any kind of return on their investment other than the social impact that the project may create, there's no penalty if you're unsuccessful in selling it. I mean, certainly there's the deliverable could be that, perhaps the foundation that made the grant or grants, or your fiscal sponsor, at least, you could have a screening for them and your constituents to at least show them that yes, you accomplished the goal, but there's no penalty for the project not finding distribution. And I would even include in this batch limited TV series, because that's a format that now we're seeing, you know, in the last year and a half, probably more than we ever have in the past. So it's no different there, where people are creating content that's intended to be, you know, a limited TV series that may or may not get picked up. They may not have a distributor when they embark on at least making the pilot.
Well, I would argue that there's no penalty, you know, either way. There's no penalty if you have 100% of your film financed by private investors. There's no penalty if your film is 100% financed with or funded by donors and foundation grants. I mean, that's the great thing about well, I guess I would say independent financing in general. I mean, you know, our obligation as producers is to do the best job we can, make the best film we can, and then seek distribution partners to get it out there. There's no penalty if you fail at finding an audience. I would say that with a film that can be considered a hybrid film, or a film that's aiming for this double bottom line, that one of the other opportunities you have once you finish the film or at some point along the way is to seek grants specifically or donations specifically for an impact campaign. So right. Yes, it's quite true that whether that, you know, any movie might have a hard time finding a distributor, but there are certain movies that are going to lend themselves to doing, you know, grassroots, what we used to call grassroots distribution or DIY distribution, or right. targeted distribution to the groups that you know you made the film for, or that you know will be able to use the film. And that takes time and money too. You know, you may have to have screenings around the country for organizations that care about the issue you're dealing with in your film. But on the other hand, you may be able to raise separate grant money or attract separate donations for this type of impact campaign. I mean, on the, you know, on the fiction side, we used to call this a P&A budget. And sometimes people came in after a film was made, or you went out to find P&A money because you didn't get the distribution deal you hoped, and you have to figure out now how to get your movie out yourself, and you need resources to do that. So we don't call it, you know, prints. A P&A used to stand for prints and advertising. We're not making right. prints anymore, but it's the same concept. We need funds to market the film and get it out without the benefit of having a big one-shop distributor do that work for us.
Right.
And you see, I think you see that in some ways, DIY distribution has become, I mean, I could make the argument on both sides, but one could say that it's become easier because we now have so many ways of reaching our audiences through social media, online platforms, etc. So we're not perhaps as dependent on the handful of distributors. But as I say, I could make the other argument too, that it's right. harder than ever.
You know, one of the things that just popped into my head, you know, I was on the board of a nonprofit a few years ago that had never actually acted as a fiscal sponsor before for film, and they were approached, and it was because the project that was being made was directly in line with the mission of the nonprofit. Not only did the nonprofit agree to act as the fiscal sponsor, but they actually supported the marketing of the project because the project that was being made was supporting the mission. And so not only could you use your own social media network as outreach, but here you had the muscle of a $24 million a year budgeted nonprofit that was willing to help you cross promote your fundraising, and then help with the marketing of the project once it was completed. So strategically, it was really smart of that producer to approach that nonprofit.
Well, that's a very good example. I mean, I don't know if you want to tell us which nonprofit organization that was, but I think that in general, when you're doing hybrid films, you are also giving yourself the opportunity to work with a coalition, I would say, of nonprofit organizations that care about your film. And as John just said, and this goes beyond which one of them might have been also your fiscal sponsor, but a range of organizations that really care about the film you've made and are going to help you in various ways get it out to their audiences, their constituencies. And maybe this is happening entirely outside the kind of what we would consider the traditional film and television industry. So I think you're making a very good point, John. And I just want to expand widen the lens a little bit, because it's really important for you to think about who your allies are. When you're making a hybrid film, who are your allies? Some of them may be providing you with cash, but others may be providing you with a tremendous marketing support.
That's right. That's right. Well, look, I can't thank you enough for being here. And I'm going to welcome Natalie back. But I can't thank you enough for being here and taking the time to talk to everybody. And it's just always nice to see you. So, we'll see you in the classroom soon, I hope. But thank you again for joining today.
Well, it was my pleasure. And I really look forward to the feedback from the audience. So let's see what comes next here.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you both. Yes.
Okay.
And thank you to everyone who submitted questions for our experts today. We got quite a few. We tried our best to cover as much as possible. John, thank you for taking those questions from the Q&A. If anyone did post a question that we did not get to, or you'd like to post some additional questions, you can always head over to theproductioncommunity.com. We have a business and production forum where you can post questions, and we will get our answers up there for you in quick order. All right. And we do encourage you that if you'd like to revisit today's webinar, a couple of people did ask how to access this information, that you head over to ep.com/master series. We post all of the recordings from our master series webinars on our website, and we have over 50 episodes available for viewing on demand at any time. And while you're over at ep.com, we would also like you to check out the production incentives pages, which are the destination for any piece of information related to production incentives. This includes incentives news, our jurisdiction comparison tool, where you can compare side-by-side views of multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. You can use our incentives estimator to see just how much you can save, and you connect with John and our entire incentives group to ensure that your production gets the best incentive and financing guidance in the industry. We also encourage you to visit my.ep.com, which is where you can access your last 3 years of U.S. EP pay information, compare week-over-week changes, or update your personal profile or mailing information if you happen to relocate. And it is also your destination to purchase the new Movie Magic Budgeting, which is available now. We also are offering a 1-month free trial. And you can also access our e-learning academy. EP has launched an e-learning academy with over a dozen courses available, including Production Accounting 101 and 201 as part of our professional track. And we also have courses on all of the EP technology that we have available, which can help you level up your skills and take the next step in your career. So we encourage you to join the thousands of members who have already signed up at my.ep.com. A special thank you again to Sandra and to John for joining us and walking us through the very complex topic of hybrid financing. We hope everyone in the audience walked away with some great information, and we thank you for joining us. We hope that you all stay safe and healthy, and that we will see you at our next Master Series.